In the heart of Eastern Europe, a conflict unfolds that has reshaped the global landscape. This is the story of the Russia-Ukraine war, a conflict with deep roots, devastating consequences, and a future that remains uncertain. To understand what's happening today, we must first look back, not just to 2014, but centuries into the past. The relationship between Russia and Ukraine is a long and complex tapestry, woven with shared cultural heritage, language, and religion, but also marked by periods of Russian imperial domination and Ukrainian struggles for independence. The idea of a distinct Ukrainian identity has been a powerful force for centuries. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence, a move overwhelmingly supported by its people. This set the stage for a new era, but the old ties and tensions with Russia remained just beneath the surface. For years, Ukraine navigated a delicate balancing act between leaning towards the West and maintaining a relationship with its powerful eastern neighbor. The first major turning point came in 2004 with the Orange Revolution. Widespread protests against election fraud led to a revolt, bringing a pro-Western government to power. This signaled a clear shift in Ukrainian popular sentiment, one that Moscow watched with growing unease. A decade later, these tensions would explode. In late 2013, then-President Viktor Yanukovych, under pressure from Moscow, abruptly abandoned a long-awaited association agreement with the European Union. This decision sparked a wave of massive protests in Kyiv's Maidan Square, known as the Revolution of Dignity. The protests were a powerful display of the Ukrainian people's desire for a European future and a rejection of Russian influence. The government's violent crackdown only fueled the movement. In February 2014, after months of intense clashes, Yanukovych fled the country. For many Ukrainians, it was a victory for democracy. For the Kremlin, it was seen as a Western-backed coup on its doorstep. Russia's response was swift and decisive. In March 2014, Russian forces, often referred to as Little Green Men for their unmarked uniforms, seized control of the Crimean Peninsula. A hastily organized and internationally disputed referendum followed, and Russia formally annexed Crimea, a move condemned by the international community but celebrated within Russia. Simultaneously, a new front opened in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region. Pro-Russian separatist movements, which Kyiv and its Western allies say were orchestrated and armed by Moscow, declared so-called People's Republics in Donetsk and Luhansk. A brutal conflict erupted between these separatists and the Ukrainian military. This war in the Donbas would simmer for 8 long years, claiming over 14,000 lives and displacing millions, largely fading from global headlines but never truly ending. It was a period of trench warfare, ceasefires that never held, and immense human suffering, a grim foreshadowing of what was to come. Throughout this period, the diplomatic gears turned, but with little success. The Minsk agreements, intended to broker peace, were repeatedly violated by both sides and failed to resolve the underlying political disputes. Meanwhile, Ukraine continued to drift westward, enshrining its aspiration to join NATO and the European Union in its constitution, a red line for Russian President Vladimir Putin. He had long viewed NATO's eastward expansion as a direct threat to Russia's security and repeatedly warned of consequences. In the months leading up to February 2022, the world watched as Russia began a massive military buildup along Ukraine's borders. Diplomatic efforts intensified, with world leaders shuttling between Kyiv, Moscow, and Western capitals in a frantic attempt to de-escalate. Russia issued a series of security demands, including a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO. These demands were rejected by the West as non-starters. On February 21, 2022, Putin delivered a long, televised speech questioning Ukraine's very statehood and recognizing the independence of the separatist republics in Donbas. 3 days later, in the early morning hours of February 24th, the world awoke to shocking news. Russia had launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine from the north, east, and south. The initial Russian strategy seemed to bank on a swift, decisive victory. Columns of tanks and troops rolled towards the capital, Kyiv, aiming to decapitate the government and install a puppet regime. The world held its breath, with many analysts predicting the fall of Kyiv within days. But they underestimated the fierce resolve of the Ukrainian people and their military. Led by President Volodymyr Zelensky, who famously rejected an offer to evacuate by saying, "I need ammunition, not a ride," Ukrainians mounted a stunning defense. Ordinary citizens took up arms, and the Ukrainian army, hardened by 8 years of war in the Donbas, fought back with tenacity and skill. The Russian advance on Kyiv stalled and ultimately failed. By early April, Russian forces had withdrawn from the north, leaving behind scenes of devastation and alleged war crimes in towns like Bucha and Irpin, which shocked the world. Having failed to take Kyiv, Russia shifted its focus back to the east and south. The goal became to secure the entire Donbas region and create a land bridge to Crimea. What followed was a brutal war of attrition, characterized by intense artillery duels, grinding frontline battles, and immense destruction. Cities like Mariupol were besieged and reduced to ruins, with the siege of the Azovstal steel plant becoming a symbol of both Ukrainian resistance and humanitarian catastrophe. Throughout the summer and into the fall of 2022, the front line barely moved, with both sides suffering heavy casualties for small territorial gains. Then, in late summer and early autumn of 2022, the tide appeared to turn once more. Ukraine launched a stunning counter-offensives. First, in the Kharkiv region in the northeast, Ukrainian forces broke through Russian lines in a lightning advance, liberating thousands of square kilometers of territory in a matter of days. This was followed by a slower but equally significant push in the south, culminating in November with the liberation of Kherson, the only regional capital Russia had managed to capture since the full-scale invasion began. These victories were a massive morale boost for Ukraine and demonstrated its ability to conduct successful large-scale offensive operations, thanks in part to a steady flow of advanced Western weaponry and intelligence. The conflict has since entered a new, grueling phase. Russia has mobilized hundreds of thousands of new troops and has resorted to a campaign of long-range missile and drone strikes against Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure, attempting to break the will of the Ukrainian people by plunging them into darkness and cold during the winter. The fighting has remained most intense in the east, with the battle for the city of Bakhmut becoming one of the longest and bloodiest of the entire war, drawing comparisons to the trench warfare of World War I. The human cost of this war is staggering. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes, creating the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. The death toll, both military and civilian, continues to rise into the tens of thousands, though exact figures are difficult to verify. The economic impact is global, disrupting supply chains and contributing to food and energy crises far beyond the battlefield. The war has also re-energized NATO, with historically neutral Finland and Sweden seeking to join the alliance, and has prompted a massive increase in military aid from Western countries to Ukraine. Today, the war grinds on with no clear end in sight. Ukraine continues to fight for its sovereignty and survival, while Russia appears determined to achieve its strategic objectives, no matter the cost. The path to peace remains elusive, as the fundamental disagreements that ignited this conflict are deeper and more entrenched than ever. The war in Ukraine is not just a regional conflict. It is a defining moment for the 21st century, a brutal test of international law, national sovereignty, and the endurance of the human spirit in the face of aggression. The story is far from over, and the world continues to watch, hoping for an end to the violence and a just and lasting peace. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of the events shaping our world.